Hi, I'm Rissel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I am doing Criminoli's Read What You Own challenge, where my husband has picked out 100 of the books on our shelf that he thinks I haven't read, given them all a number, wrap them up so I don't know which ones they are, and then I pick them one at a time out of this saucer jar. And now, the last video I picked the book Audre Lord, The Master's Tools will Never Dismantle the Master's House. Then I was going to go out for a trip, so I picked two other books to bring with me. And this was book 8, Welcome to the Desert of the Real by Slavoj Žižek, and book 49, which is Toril Moi, Sexual Textual Politics, which is about feminist literary theory. So I've had 3 theoretical kind of books this time, which is a very sort of specific type of non-fiction books. So very often when we talk about non-fiction books here on BookTube, we're talking about books that say something about a thing. So they are collecting the research, or they have done research themselves, and they are talking about the history of books, for example, or the history of a bird type, or the history of a band. While these are what we would call more theoretical books or philosophical books, where Slavoj Žižek, Toril Moi, and also Audre Lord, in actually all of these, both of these are actually essay collections as well, in essays are arguing for how should we understand something, and why is sort of their idea about understanding this thing the right thing to understand it. Starting with Audre Lord, she was, again, self-described Black lesbian mother warrior poet. And in this one, she has, I think this is also an essay collection, even if it's much shorter essays, where she is talking about the situation in America for especially Black women. And the essay that I found most interesting is, of course, the main one, The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House. Because what she is trying to do in this essay is talk about, is it possible to do resistance with the tools that have been oppressing you? Or is it a necessity for people who are oppressed, who want to sort of object to the oppression, to find new tools to do that? Audre Lord is a poet, and she is, among other things, talking about poetry as a form of resistance. And that's not necessarily something new. She didn't invent that. But what she is talking about is how is poetry viewed and defined by institutions, by sort of the in-the-know educated elite, and what does that do with the possibilities in, for example, poetry, if the room for poetry has been very narrowly defined in the name of education. And I'm saying education, hence I work within academia. I recognize what she is talking about in regard to things being very narrowly defined, but also that when things become too narrowly defined, we do go against the purpose of, well, education and the academia. Academia is supposed to find knowledge, not limit knowledge. And I also really liked her other essay, which is Use of Anger, Women Responding to Racism. Because Audre Lord is herself highly educated and moves in highly educated spaces. And she talks about how when her white female colleagues want to do something about racism, they very often invite everyone else but Black people, because the white women in this educational space feel like Black people get so angry and the anger stops the discussion. It is impossible to speak in such a situation. And again, this whole with, is it possible to use your anger as a form of resistance? And what does that, what space do you have to do that if anger has sort of been defined out of a resistance space? The next one I read was Slavoj Žižek, Welcome to the Desert of the Real. These are essays that Slavoj Žižek is, he's a Slovenian researcher. My husband uses Slavoj Žižek a lot in his work, so I was just getting help from him. He's a Slovenian researcher who works a lot with regard to psychoanalytical theory and Marxist theory.
And Hegel.
And Hegel. Do you want to... Again, my husband knows a lot about Slavoj Žižek, and I'm surprised I haven't actually encountered more Slavoj Žižek up until this. But this is a collection of essays that he wrote in a response to the response to September 11. And what he sort of is talking about is, of course, what do we think in regard to democracy when we are angry, when our safety has been put into threat? Why do we very often see that someone's anger response is okay while others aren't? What makes us define one group as being worthy of a response and another group isn't, especially considering that we can be the reason why they are angrily responding. There is a very interesting essay in this that talks a lot about Palestinians and the Israelis. And I don't know what I think about the fact that this book was written, again, very shortly after September 11 in 2001. And yet it's still so relevant. It's still so on the nose for how things seem to work today. Nothing really has happened in the over 20 years since this book was published. But maybe that's also an interesting point, that we assume, due to technology, and that technology is developing so quickly, we have the assumption that our society is therefore developing quite quickly. But maybe it isn't. Technology and society isn't necessarily the two same things. He ends this book with an essay where he talks about action, and he talks about why it's difficult to do something in a situation like, for example, September 11th, because we need to then act instead of just react or emote. And acting, of course, means risking something, it means going into the unknown. And we don't like doing that, especially when our emotions are very high. An act always involves a radical risk, what Derrida following Kierkegaard calls the madness of a decision. It's a step into the open with no guarantee about a final outcome. And of course, when we are angry, we want to know the final outcome. We want revenge. We want to hurt the people who have hurt us. And I think that this is a theme that it's interesting to talk about. What do we do as a society when things have been, well, undone in a sense? And what kind of act can that require? Why is this so relevant? It's sad. And then I read Toril Moi, Sexual Textual Politics. I love this book. My husband has asked me what up until now has been my favorite books. I really loved the Doctorow books. Someone is coming, someone is leaving. And I also love this one, and I don't know which one is my favorite yet. Toril Moi is talking about not why we should have a feminist reading of literature that is viewing literature and analyzing literature through a feminist lens, but she is talking about how that can be done. And she represents two sort of schools. And there is a critique of this book that the creation of these two schools is very much a product of her. She was one who sort of said that these are two different schools rather than just two different ways of viewing it. But what she talks about the Anglo-American school and the French school. And the Anglo-American school, when reading in regard to feminist theory, is looking at literature and regarding how social roles create the women and how the literature either describes or lacks describing the role of the woman. And what she, among other things, talks about this discussion around James Joyce's character, Molly Brown. And he describes Molly Brown as someone who menstruates in his books. And this is, of course, a huge discussion through a feminist lens because the sort of Molly Brown, by menstruating, becomes a very real character because women's body do menstruate. And when I'm talking about women's body here, I'm talking about cisgendered women. They menstruate, at least most of them. They get pregnant. So the female experience is in and of itself quite a bodily existence. While men, at the same time, if we connect them with their body, it's very often in either an sort of unrealistic way, either by describing a body that isn't itself realistic, I'm talking to you, romance books, or in a form of he has a bare belly, and that's the joke. So the male bodies, by being described, are unrealistic, while the female body is realistic when it's described. Or you need to describe the female body to give a realistic portrayal of a woman. And the fact that this is the case, that is sort of the Anglo-American perspective of how do you read a feminist interpretation into it. While the French school that she talks about is more that the language itself with its, and the French, of course, is inspired by, she talks about Julia Kristeva and Freud and Foucault. And all of this is sort of the school that talks about that the language itself is othering. So it's not that describing women is a way of viewing sort of the role or view of women in literature. But by creating the word man, you are in necessity creating an other in the language itself, and that other is a woman. And that is the focus of sort of the French school, that womenness in its essence is simply the otherness of the man, what is excluded from the man in the language that we speak regarding it. So there is sort of two different ways to look at a feminist reading, but I don't really know if you should call it two different schools. I don't really know if it's sort of, when she talks about this is what the French do and this is what the Anglo-American does, that in itself can be quite limiting in understanding, because who knows if it's sort of broader than that. But just the fact that, see, for example, a sentence that is very important within feminist theory, which is Simone de Beauvoir's, I am not born a woman, I am created woman. This sentence can therefore be interpreted two different ways. Is she created as a woman due to the social aspect of it, the way she has been viewed, the way other women have been viewed, the way her words are interpreted differently than a man? Or does she mean that I'm not born a woman, I'm created into a woman, that the word woman is an otherness to a man, that isn't something inherent in her or the way she lives her life, but is in the language and the discourse of the language itself. And I'm not going to talk about forever about this book, even though I probably could. One of the things that it also made me think about is, of course, book social media. Because there is I am seeing a trend where we used to have people talking about books either very emotional or very academic or school-like by using theory. And of course, you had this whole debacle, and I'm not going into that debacle, of the intellectualism, anti-intellectualism. What space should book social media be? And then now, I think because a lot of book bloggers and book vloggers and the people interacting on the space has simply read so much that they're just leveling up in their reading, in a sense. A lot of them are now talking about wanting to be more critical to their reading. It's not about the numbers anymore. It's more about the reflections. What are we gaining from reading these books? What has this book given me? So, and what they are talking about is, of course, analysis. But they don't want to use the word analysis, either because they're not necessarily educated, or because analysis sounds boring. But analysis is just thinking about what do I think about this book? What does this book mean? But there is one more thing. that separates sort of analysis from necessarily just squeeing about a book. And that is, of course, you need to reflect on a book based on something. You need something to look at a book with, an understanding of what am I looking at, what am I looking after. For example, in regard to, for example, feminist theory, am I looking at how a woman is created? These female characters are created as female characters and viewed and dealt with as female characters? Or am I looking at the way women are othered in the language itself? And if you don't have an academic education, if you haven't sort of studied literature, and most of us on social media haven't studied literary analysis, that can be difficult to do, even in sort of the low-level way that we are doing it. None of us are trying to do a doctorate here, or very few of us are trying to do a doctorate here. So I'm very glad that I read it, because it was so accessible that I think it could give me a tool to help understand my reading better without having to go and do 3 years of literary analysis. That would have been fun, but that's not the space I am at the moment. And having sort of accessible books like that, I hope can help help us put words to what we think. That was a very bad way of saying it. But that was the 3 books I read. And now I'm going to pick a new one. And it's book 82. Give me a moment and I'll find book 82. I'm sorry. Talking about sort of going from analysis to analysis. This is Noam Chomsky. He is another theorist that works within linguistics. He works a lot with language and how language is to be understood. So Noam Chomsky is very often compared to Foucault. And when I'm saying compared, I mean they had a few debates at the time because they had such different views in regard to language. But I'll read this and I'll let you know what I think. So what are words or sort of things that you wish that you knew a bit about that you think could help your reading and to understand what the books are doing to you as a person? Let me know in the comments down below, and thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.